Region's RailDecarb21 event, this time covering operational carbon reduction. As you can all see, I am not Dr. Sam Bevans. I'm Carl King, fringe to play the civil mister, but I'm the other Technical and Innovation Manager at RIA. I welcome you all to this session, which I'll be chairing. The second session will be, and we seem to be having a problem here. There we go. Sorry, we've got three main speakers today in this session. First, we've got the excellent Lara Young, who's the Group Climate Change Director at Costain. Then we'll have Wendi Wheeler from Network Rail Scotland on track to net zero, and Mike Nugent from Hitachi Social Innovation. And we're also going to finish off with a couple of 5-minute elevator pitches from Scott Parnell and Loughborough University. So I will get straight in. I'm sure you don't want to be hearing to me, so let's get straight into it. And can I please welcome Lara Young, the Group Climate Change Director at Costane, to come. She's going to be talking about making net zero a reality. Thank you, Lara.
Hi everyone, it is a delight to actually be here in real and see some people face to face. Makes a difference from the screen. So as Carl rightly mentioned, I'm going to talk more about, okay, I think everyone's made some commitments and we've heard some great stuff from Joe this morning and from John around some of the technical challenges. But what I'm going to look to concentrate on is more around, okay, what does net zero look like on a day-to-day and how are we bringing this to life? And so, as John eloquently put, actually, there is no silver bullet to net zero. So my presentation is not looking to say there is one sole solution to this, nor is it trying to convey actually there's one technology. I think we've already had the discussion, we certainly mentioned this morning, that, for example, it's going to be a marriage of electrification and hydrogen, just as an example. So what I thought about when I was putting forward this presentation, or putting this together, is I could have provided, I don't know, 3 or 4 examples of case studies of some of the really awesome stuff that we're doing on a number of different projects. But realistically, whilst there might be elements of that that could be transposable to your projects or the works that, or the industries that we're working in, it wouldn't really give you the picture of how we necessarily came about doing that and why we focused on that bit in the instance. So rather than focus on some case studies, but happy to have a conversation around that in the Q&A, what I've decided to do is using Costane as illustrating the example of how we've gone about this. So while some of the areas that we focus on might not always be applicable to the entirety of the audience, the manner in which we've identified this and how we've gone about it certainly is transposable to everyone. So before I start too much, who is Costane for those of you that don't necessarily know us? So Costane is a smart infrastructure and solutions provider. What does that actually mean? Essentially, it means that we work across the entirety of the life cycle of a project. So we get very early involvement with early designs and concepts, all the way through to delivery, which is predominantly what we've been previously historically well known for doing, but also do a lot of work on existing infrastructure around asset optimization. And we work in the rail industry, but across the entire of the transportation market, in addition to energy, water and defence. So quite a broad spectrum. So setting that out, and how do we achieve net zero across an organisation such as Costane, where you're essentially working across a huge array of different markets and sectors? And if we're truly going to be the clean growth leaders that we've set out to be, well, actually, to get to net zero and even beyond that, we need to ensure that we are truly addressing the entirety of our footprint. So the whole approach that we have taken, and throughout this presentation, is very much looking to tackle our whole life cycle footprint. So that means looking at our direct emissions, so as an organisation, which is great to do, but actually the majority of the emissions that, whilst we don't directly control them, we certainly have a massive part to play in influencing and reducing them. So a huge amount of this actual focus is targeting our clients and our supplier chains footprints, if we truly want to achieve net zero across the whole life cycle. So with that in mind, at the end of 2019, we published our Climate Change Action Plan. And it is very simple in the sense of it is a plan on a page. The idea being that it sets out what we are going to do between now and 2035 to get to net zero across the whole life cycle of our footprint. So with that in mind, as I said, it's a plan on a page, but to reassure, the numbers and what we set out to do and why we're tackling certain elements and why we set certain dates is very much informed by the data that sits behind that. But the reason for it to being simplistic in that sense and looking to keep it as simple as possible is because addressing net zero and that whole climate change agenda is already complicated as enough. So we've not looked to make this even more complicated in that sense. So a few things to note around our climate change action plan, and then I will follow into what's in it and how we come about this and the relation with how do we reduce emissions. You'll note it's a climate change action plan, not a carbon action plan. The reason for that is because we recognise that climate change, there's a significant proportion of tackling the implications of climate change and the effects of that is through reducing our greenhouse gases, but it's not the only element that we need to tackle. However, we can't, and we're not looking to try and tackle climate change all in one go. As much as we would love to, realistically, less, in this instance, less is more. And actually really setting the scene of what we're doing in the carbon space in the first instance, set out where do we need to go, what do we need to do, the milestones, getting that rolling, and then as that's progressing, weaving in and essentially doing the same thing for biodiversity, social value, and all of the other areas to be truly driving towards genuine sustainable development. So our climate change action plan sets out the framework as to how we're going to approach all of these different topics. And we've prioritised carbon to achieve, say, net zero in the first instance as a priority. But this will come in time. That's it. In addition to that, so you'll also note that it's a date by 2035. And what that means is, and there's a number of reasons for that, and that is at the very latest. So this plan is not perfect. No plan, a net zero plan is, because we don't have all of the answers yet. However, what this plan does do, it has used information and data to actually assess and set out what are the key things across when we map out our whole life cycle project footprint. Where are the key biggest hotspots that we actually need to tackle? What's the biggest bang for our bucks in the first instance? Understand what's within our gift, and then actually map out what we need to do before we move on to the next elements. And so in a nutshell, our climate change action plan only focuses on 4 areas. There are 4 key big areas, but there's only 4 of them. And those 4, and I will go into the detail of what they are, but those 4 key areas make up about 96% of our whole life cycle footprint. That doesn't mean we won't address the remaining proportion of that footprint, but it does mean that we've prioritised and set out and put a line in the sand as to, okay, these are the first elements that we need to tackle. As I mentioned, this isn't just my perception of the world of what we should be doing or anyone's perception in Costane of what we should be doing. This is very much informed by data. And 100%, I'm sure everyone will say that, there are challenges around the data quality. It is siloed in our industry. I think everyone can recognise that. But we definitely have enough information as it stands today to be able to paint a picture. It isn't a perfect picture and there are gaps, but we can certainly have a decent picture of what our whole life cycle footprint represents. It might still be a bit hazy, and we are continuing to work with that to ensure that we perfection that picture, but we're very able to identify, okay, these are the priority areas and tackle that. Are these 4 key big areas that I mentioned? There isn't anything in this that should be a surprise. They're all well-known challenges of the industry. The key big fundamental part of it is actually really tackling and homing in on them to ensure that we sustain our focus on these areas. So up till now, I think historically the industry's potentially dabbled in some of these spaces, but not really taken it to town as much as we need to. So the first one is around design. And again, no surprise in that. And in the design element, it's not just ensuring that the projects that whether we're designing them or delivering them are as efficient and low carbon as possible. But as we mentioned before, it's also ensuring the energy efficiency and the whole life cycle of that, be it asset, be it a station, be it the track that we're setting out, is genuinely as sustainable as it can be within what is available across the industry now. So design plays a huge part in addressing that. And we are doing actually quite a bit of work at the moment, especially in Scotland, around supporting Scotland's net zero roadmap. And that's not just understanding the clean and renewable technologies that could be integrated into the rail industry, but also understanding how do we, the potentials of carbon capture, storage and transportation, or hydrogen, etc., across the networks. So joining up a number of networks, not just the transportation, as Joe rightly said, around joining up the entirety of those networks, in addition to linking that in with the energy networks, if we're truly going to make this work. So design plays a massive part in this, and we are aligned to PAS 2080 to help achieve those ambitions. And we've set a target that by 2023, we're going to be providing, regardless of whether it's asked, low carbon options with every solution that we put forward. Recognising they might not always get taken forward, but the idea being that we're proactively driving the behaviour change to sort of point, and it might just be as simple as you're missing a trick if you don't do this, probably formulated slightly differently, but essentially in that shape. The second one is materials. And again, not trying to solve climate change in one go and homing in on materials, there are three key materials, concrete, steel and aggregate, that essentially blow every other material out the water in terms of carbon emissions. So what we've done is we've prioritised, and our plan solely focuses on those three materials. The idea being that we will address other materials in time, but if we truly to get as an industry to get to net zero by our 2035 date or any of the dates that you've set out, that is, those three key items are huge, and actually it's not going to change overnight. So we recognise that. We recognise it's going to take time to incorporate that. So they have been the priority. And then the third one, and this is due to the sheer nature of the scale and our delivery activities and the types of contracts and projects that we work on, but actually our vehicle footprint is colossal, not just the car fleet emissions, which does play a proportion, but also our plant emissions. And again, prioritising and understanding, okay, within all of the things we do, where is the biggest value for that? And then lastly, it's around our energy usage. And that's in our permanent accommodation, which is probably the easier of the two because they're there and you install, and the temporary accommodation, the site setup. And what we're recognising in that is actually there is a huge amount of innovation that goes on in that space, but we're looking at industrialising the innovation that goes on to really make a step change and actually upping the norm on what is the basics of the site setup across the industry to really then integrate that further. So incorporating renewables into site setups. It sounds simple, but my point would be is when I started with Costane in 2016, we were trialling hybrid generators, and we know where they work, we know where they're suited, where they're not suited. So 100% it's not a blanket answer. But today we're still trialling as an industry hybrid generators. Actually, we could really just make a default, not saying that you use them everywhere for the sake of, but we do know where they should be the default. So it's really looking to up that standard and make it so that we can progress to some of these things. They might sound very simple what I'm saying, but these are the foundation steps and the baby steps of actually achieving some of the greater things that we need to achieve in the industry. So I'm not going to go into detail into the two items that you have here, but these are just examples of what does that look like day to day. So if I take materials, and what we're doing in the design space is similar, so materials, as I mentioned, it's concrete, steel and aggregate. So as an organisation, what we set out to do is understand, well, okay, we know that there's low carbon concretes out there. We know that we've trialled them for a certain amount of time. We know where they work, again, where they don't work. What we've set out to do is mandating where it is applicable to make it default. We're doing that. But also a key one is understanding where actually, whilst there is a huge amount going on in that space, it's not yet necessarily market available or nationally available to use this across the entirety. But where we are having to use traditional mixes for the moment, we can certainly reduce and be more efficient in our design. So essentially reducing the amount of over-engineering for the sake of. So just to be clear, that is not reducing emissions to the detriment of quality, safety, cost, whatever it might be. We're still meeting all of those standards, but what we are ensuring as we're doing is we're not over-engineering where it's not necessarily required. And that is something that's happening all across every sort of level of the value chain. And so it's challenging specifications and recognising where there's those opportunities. So, and this is just another example, again, of what we're doing in our car fleet transition. So as you'll note, and essentially we've gone through the same process for all of these items. We're using information, the data that we have to understand, okay, where's the challenge, where's the biggest hotspots? We know the long-term goal. What are the key milestones we need to break it down? So this is just an example of what we're doing within our car fleet transition plan. And you'll notice that it covers the company cars, which is a direct emission for the organisation. But if we were to only focus on company cars, whilst that is still great to do, I'm just using this as an example, but if we didn't focus on also addressing the emission footprint from our car allowance vehicles, which we don't directly control, but actually that does represent 50% of the vehicles that are driven by the Costain employees. So what we've done is we've set out a plan that is shaping the steps, regardless of whether you're in a company car, car allowance, or it's casual mileage type vehicles. we're not trying to prescribe this is the way to do it, because there is not one solution is right for one individual, might not be for someone else. What we are ensuring to do, and that same approach is applicable for what we're doing in design, what we're doing across a number of things, is we're making by default all of the options that an individual has available to them low carbon by default. So it's still up to the individual's choice, and same with the designer if they're choosing which mixes to use or what's most relevant as to what's most appropriate for that solution in question. What we're making sure is actually out of all of the options you have, they're all by default low carbon. And again, it's not trying to make this all happen tomorrow. We do recognise and have taken into account the maturity of the industry and of us as an organisation, of how quick we are to change. So how do we actually bring this to life? So, okay, we've set out a number of targets and we've rolled out a number of, we've got some plans and some, a track of where we're going to go. And it's very easy, we've all got some great commitments and things like that. Holding ourselves accountable and actually bringing to life the plan is the hard part of the two. We've all set ambitious targets, now we've got to make them actually happen. So what we're using is a resource efficiency matrix, which is essentially a maturity matrix that we use across the entirety of our organisation, be it, this is the complex delivery version, there's one for design, there's one for consultancy. The idea is this matrix doesn't give you the answer. It doesn't say you've got to use this, or this is what we're going to do, or this is the right solution. What it does ensure is that you actually, as a contract or as a project, it ensures that the focus is remaining and does target the biggest hotspot areas. And the idea is, and the proof is in the pudding, and since we've been rolling out the resource efficiency matrix over the last couple of years, we've already identified over £51 million in operational and capital costs. And that's across the value chain, so for clients, supply chain and Costane. And that equates to about 1.9 million tonnes of carbon emissions, both embodied and operational emissions. So it definitely happens. So from that perspective, and how do we actually make net zero a reality? Some really quick wins from the history or the learnings that we've had to date is having clarity of the whole picture. Even if you don't address it, understanding actually what you're targeting. Is it a nice to do, and it's a great thing to do, but actually, the bigger fish to fry is somewhere else. Even if you don't try and address it all. Ownership and accountability is the key one. So the topic is net zero, but actually 3/4 of our plan actually relates to design, procurement, commercial. So it's not trying to make everyone a carbon expert. What we are trying to do is translate what does carbon mean if you're a QS, if you're a planner, if you're an engineer. And so that's key in translating it. The next bit to that is also the ownership and accountability. So it happens to be an environmental drive that we're focusing on, but that doesn't mean it's all down to an environmental specialist or a carbon specialist. So the accountability of actually owning up to who has to do what and who has a part to play when. And that feeds into the incentivisation across the value chain. So we recognise that everyone has a part to play in this. Clients do, the supply chain do, Costain does. So what we're ensuring is that the relevant parties are responsible at the right time. And that does mean sometimes asking the awkward question at a time, or sometimes flagging something that everyone knows but doesn't really get addressed because historically that's how it's always been. Recognising ourselves as well, that we have to do this better. The key ones, and I think the industry is a little bit victim of this, is the topic is complicated enough. So let's not try and overcomplicate it even more. And we can make carbon a dark art if we really want to, but if we're going to actually make a change, we need to make it accessible, and it doesn't need to be complicated. The second one is around information. There's a huge drive for data. The challenge is there's so much data that we already have. I know we're calling out for more, but we already don't know what to do with the first bit that we've got. So actually, don't get overwhelmed in the data, and there is the risk of information overload. So what we've looked to do is assess everything that we've got, and then actually taking the bold step of identifying, okay, whilst there are 100 metrics, we're only going to focus on these 4 because they're the real key big items. And then lastly, and this is, I think, the challenge, is don't try and tackle everything at once. I know that sounds very simple, but the challenge is there of actually cutting down and really rationalising what is genuinely achievable. There's a huge amount that needs to be done. That doesn't mean it doesn't need to be done at pace, but one step at a time rather than trying to crawl to the London Marathon is a bit of a challenge. So yeah, so if you do want to find out more about some of the examples and practicals and case studies that we have, there is more information available on our website, on our Climate Change Hub. But yeah, thank you. Hopefully that gave you an insight into how we're making net zero a reality across Costane and how that can translate into the industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lara. Has anyone got questions here for Lara? I've got any online as well. I have the phone here if anyone has any questions. Sorry.
So it's Jonathan Brown from Ricardo. Thank you, Lara. That was really interesting and great to see how proactive you guys are being at Costane on this. My question would be, the rail industry is notorious for wanting everything to be well in place, talking about things until they have an exact solution before they will do anything, and it causes total paralysis. How is a construction civils company that probably isn't too dissimilar in terms of long asset lives of buildings and so on, how do you get them to move past that and just do it?
Yeah, and I totally agree with your point. It is a challenge that we face as an industry, organisations, I think, at all different levels. I think recognising the fact that we don't have all the answers, but it's okay to not have all of the answers. The bits that we do know where we still need to innovate, so take the example of low carbon materials. We know that actually low carbon materials we haven't got any net zero materials or anything further. So we recognise there is a still need to innovate. What that doesn't mean is it shouldn't hinder the fact that with what we already do know and what we have already proven, we can implement that now. So we don't need to lay that long term, I think is key. And that is one probably the greatest challenge around it. And essentially, especially around baselining and understanding at the very beginning when we're design phase, one of the challenges we have, and carbon specialists can be one of quite guilty of this, is we can spend 6 months trying to build a baseline, but actually the design was at a really early stage, and by the time you've got a baseline that's, you know, super robust, they've already moved on 6 months, and you kind of need to reinvent. So there is a case of recognising actually your information is going to be only as mature as what you have, but taking that stance of, okay, you don't have all the answers, but you've got a pretty good idea of these are the 4 areas that you need to focus on, and then harnessing from there. So keep it, and key part of that is actually voicing that and recognising it. So that's one of the ways we've gone about ensuring that.
Thank you, Lara. I'll just do one quick question, and then I'm thinking about we're running a bit late. Sorry. Did you say the company's first?
Hi, my name is I'm from Loughborough.
Hey.
Just a question around the carbon KPI that you agree with the sort of contract partner. What was the activity that was being measured there? And also, what other examples have you done to demonstrate or at least carbon emissions monitoring with tarmac, for example?
Yeah, so around materials, it's not necessarily setting a default of X, Y, or Z. You know, you're only going to use this type of spec. It's ensuring that it's ensuring that the supply chain is genuinely incentivized. So talking about it's great, but actually making sure that our contracts are set up in the right way to ensure that they're brought to the table at the right time, agreeing a joint target, but also the clarity around understanding who has a part to play in order to make that happen. So actually even working with Tarmac and some of the KPIs that we've had with them, that does also require sometimes client buy-in. So we can actually use an innovative mix that Tarmac's potentially identified as viable, but that might mean a deviation to a specification. So it's also, again, getting every party involved. So that's pretty key. And we've been doing that essentially across all of the different items. It's bringing together the right parties and voicing where those opportunities are.
Thank you, Lara. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your questions.
Cheers, thank
She can go straight into her presentation. So it's a great pleasure to me to introduce Wendi Wheeler next. And yep, amazing from Network Rail. And I'll hand over to you, Wendi. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi everybody. It is so nice to be in Glasgow, seeing actual people and not looking at a screen. I've done an awful lot of these talks to people through a screen over the past few months, but it's really nice to be here. I'm Wendi Wheeler. I'm Sustainability Strategy Manager for Scotland's Railway. Although I work for Network Rail, the way that we're dealing with sustainability for Scotland's Railways is very much an integrated approach. We're working really closely with our major TOC, ScotRail, and also with Transport Scotland. The reason that we're doing that is because we appreciate that decarbonisation of the railway is a massive, massive job. We can't do it all by ourselves. We're finding that this integrated approach is really beneficial. Joe introduced to you earlier on the National Network Rail Environmental Sustainability Strategy. I used to work in Joe's team, so I helped to develop that strategy, particularly the low carbon option of it, the low carbon pillar. What we're doing in Scotland's railways is taking that national strategy and applying it to the railway up in Scotland. My job is to enact and deliver that strategy, but also to the needs of the Scottish Government and another international and national objectives, such as the Sustainable Development Goals and the Sustainable Rail Principles. So quite, there are some differences that I'll come to a little bit later. Along with my colleague Kyra McCluskey, that some of you might know, I lead a team of sustainability professionals up in Scotland. We're implementing the environmental sustainability strategy and focusing on 3 key areas. We've got a low emissions railway, a green and resilient railway, and a responsible railway. And within those themes, we have 10 strategic priority areas that you can see here. And there are some synergies with the national strategy. So, for example, the whole decarbonisation low emissions agenda, but you can see that we've split out some of the aspects of those agendas so that we can really focus in on the detail. Also, we've included, thanks. We've included social value in our strategy and reducing noise and nuisance. We appreciate that, some of the things that Joe was talking about earlier, being a good neighbour, noise and nuisance is particularly important to our neighbours, and therefore it's part of our strategy. So our long-term objectives for Scotland's railway are here. You'll see that they mirror quite a lot of the national strategy that Joe talked about, but the key differences that you can see fall on decarbonisation. And we know that we've got to decarbonise sooner than the rest of the organisation. It's 5 years sooner. 5 years doesn't seem that much, but when you think about the challenges of decarbonising the railway, going faster is a significant challenge. It's a really stretching ask. So for our strategy, we've made a number of high-level commitments. The ones that you can see in front of you are for our non-traction decarbonisation part of our strategy. So each of the other priorities, those 10 priorities that I talked about earlier, has a set of commitments like this. They're intentionally quite short term. They take us up to 2024, 2025. And that's because our sustainability team in Scotland is very, very new. It came into fruition a year ago. I was recruited to bring in that team. And we know that we've got an awful lot of long-term planning to do to get to decarbonising the railway and all of the other aspects of sustainability, like biodiversity, net gain, that kind of thing. And we need to, as Lara was saying, we need to walk before we can run. We need to spend the time now doing the things that are immediate and will make a difference, but also give ourselves time to plan those longer term ambitions. So that's why these are intentionally short term. So I'm always really quite guilty when I'm talking about emissions of thinking that everybody else understands what I'm talking about when I talk about emission scopes. So for those of you that know all of this, my apologies, but I suspect there might be some people in the room who don't understand emission scopes. So I'm going to do a very quick explanation for you. When we talk about emissions, we talk in 3 scopes. Scope 1 are our direct emissions, or the direct emissions of an organisation from their heat in their buildings or running their vehicle fleets. Scope 2 is indirect emissions, but that's from the energy or fuel that they purchase, the energy that they purchase, so electricity from the power stations, for example, or steam or heat that they might buy for their buildings. And then scope 3 is everything else right up and down that organisation's value chain, anything that isn't included in scope 1 and 2. And the reason that I've explained that to you is because I'm going to now talk in scopes for a couple of minutes, so it helps if you know what I'm talking about. The other thing to mention is that when we talk about carbon, we're not just talking about carbon dioxide, we're talking about a basket of emissions which includes carbon dioxide, but methane, hydrofluorocarbons, and nitrous oxide, that kind of thing. So we refer to carbon emissions, but it's a basket of emissions. Apologies for everybody who knew that already. So in terms of Network Rail Scotland's operational carbon footprint, this is what it looks like. Operational emissions are around 19,500 tonnes every year, and if we needed to replace those emissions or offset those emissions, we'd need to plant about 20,000 trees every year. By far our biggest emissions sources are from electricity and diesel use. So when Lara was talking just now about focusing in on what's important, our footprint and exercises show us really, really quickly the things that we need to zone in on. So we've been working really hard over the past few months, and we are developing science-based targets for Scotland's railway. Joe talked about the targets that we'd produced for Network Rail as a whole, and we were really proud to be able to say that we were the first railway organisation to set those targets to the most stringent measures. So what I'm doing now, having come from Joe's team to Scotland, is I'm taking that same methodology and applying it to Scotland's railway. And this is our reduction trajectory for our Scope 1 and 2 emissions. You can see how we will get there. There are a few main things that we need to do. And the first one, that really big drop that you can see, is we need to move really, really quickly to 100% renewable energy. I can tell you today that we've done that. We are continuing to enhance the way that we do that by bringing in renewable energy. But at least at this first stage, we've purchased 100% renewable energy. And then we need to do things like transitioning our fleet of cars and vans over to zero emission vehicles. We need to remove our diesel and natural gas assets, and we need to carry on with the work that we're doing on demand reduction. It's just a little bit about each of those and the things that we're doing. As I mentioned, we already purchase 100% renewable energy, but that purchasing decision is great and it helps with our target, but it's by no means enough. We need to go much further, much more quickly. So we are already engaging with the market so that we can look at bringing renewable energy into Scotland's railway. We've been mapping our land assets so that we can see the land that Network Rail owns and adjacent land and where may be available for renewable technologies like solar. We're moving to feasibility for some large ground mount solar PV sites, as well as some quite large rooftop schemes. We've also got plans to connect some new large scale wind assets into the traction network and our non-traction assets. So discussions are ongoing there. In terms of our road vehicle fleet transition, we've got to transition around about 850 vehicles within the next 12 years or so. Those targets that we've got may be accelerated, please pardon the pun. Dependent on the work that we're doing to finalise our science-based targets, we might need to do that a little bit quicker, and dependent on government policy if that changes. The biggest challenges that we have are for some of the larger vehicles that they're either electric or other fuel vehicles don't exist in the market at the moment, but also the charging infrastructure. How do we deploy that amount of charging infrastructure? Where is it needed? How will we get the electricity for that charging infrastructure? How can we integrate renewable energy for that charging infrastructure? Is the capacity available from the district network operators? That kind of thing. We're also looking at trials for hydrogen vehicles, so that's something that we're pursuing for the more remote areas of the network. In terms of efficiency opportunities, we've built quite a holistic project register now of around about 380 or 350 individual demand reduction opportunities. Those are being prioritised and quantified so that we can start to integrate those and look at the quickest wins and get the best bang for buck first. the thing that we need to do, and we appreciate that there is a massive budget challenge in the rail industry at the minute, is we need to look for alternative ways to make those schemes happen, whether that's through energy performance contracting or other innovative funding measures. But it's not just about operational carbon, and although this session is about operational carbon, I can't not mention our Scope 3 emissions. All of the things that I've just talked to you about are in our Scope 1 and 2 sectors, and that is just 4% of our total emissions. So whilst we know that we've got lots and lots of work to do to reduce our operational emissions, this also must be a massive area of focus for us. So much of our value stream emissions sit within our purchased goods and services or capital goods categories, and we know that we need to tackle those specifically to reach net zero. So to tackle those, we're doing the following things. Of course, we're electrifying the network, and we've got our long-term plans to do that through things like taking the analysis from the transport decarbonisation network strategy that Joe mentioned, and building that into a rolling programme of decarbonisation. As previously mentioned, we're investigating moving all of our traction and non-traction energy to renewable, and ideally renewable energy that's generated here in Scotland. We're working to make our new stations as low carbon as possible, and we're aiming for net zero station models. So some of the development work that's on at the moment is looking at how we can enable that at a good price. And we're engaging with our supply chain to encourage them to reduce their own emissions, because obviously we realise, again, we can't do this alone. And also we're altering our design briefs so that we're designing out carbon and introducing things such as carbon pricing and making sure that that is fed into investment decisions. That's a work in progress. Obviously it's quite difficult to change some of the processes that are embedded in the rail industry, but we're working on it. That's me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Wendy. I think we're running a little bit, as we're a bit high, so I can take one question. If there's anyone's got a question here. Do we have any questions in? Oh, we have one up there. I'll just take this one question and then I think we'll move on. That's okay. Thank you. Just have to get it see it at the end.
Paul from Hitachi Energy. Regarding the reduction on the carbon footprint and looking at the supply chain, you say that that's a challenge, or you indicated that's a challenge going forward, it's a work in progress. So on current tenders for work going forward, do you look, when you're looking at the weighting on those tenders, do you score based on their carbon footprint?
We do, yeah, we do. At the moment, and it's improving, I think the sustainability scoring is normally around 5 to 10%. For some projects it's higher, some projects have been up to 40%, it depends on the project. But obviously we're engaging with our contracts and procurement teams to enhance those scoring mechanisms.
Thank you very much, Wendy. And I'll just ask you if everyone give Wendy a round of applause. Thank you very much. I'll ask Mike Nugent to come up straight away, and we'll get straight onto the power presentation before we get into the elevator pitches. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks, and hello everyone. Likewise, nice to be here actually in person and presenting to you today. I'm also joined by my colleague Tom Smith, who's here to answer all the difficult questions. Yeah, let's talk about our zero carbon and SSE rail partnership. And there's some big alignment with what Wendy's just said, so some good things to talk about there. But let's tell you a little bit, in case you didn't know who Hitachi are and where I sit within the business. And social innovation business, which is now being rebranded as Zero Carbon. So yeah, Hitachi is very big. It's got lots of different arms to it. Hitachi Energy, Hitachi Rail, lots and lots of money being spent on innovation and R&D. But one of the things that's probably not great at is actually how you take all of that innovation and R&D and actually turn that into business opportunities. And that's really where myself and my team come in to play. We're also doing lots of work in the more general sort of decarbonisation, EV side of things, and the Optimised Prime programme is a case in point in terms of a project of work where we've currently got 3,000 vehicles actually under our service, and that's delivering all of the digital solutions for decarbonised LCV depots. And we're taking a lot of that intellectual property into the new business that I'll talk about. And then finally, we're taking the environment incredibly seriously. So Alistair Dormer, who built the Hitachi rail business, is now a senior vice president of the business, sits on the board of Hitachi, but he's now taken over our whole drive to environment. And through our principal partner status at COP26 is another illustration of our commitment to what we're trying to do as a business and how we're actually trying to deliver solutions. And I've just explained the zero carbon business and the initiative is really, it's about setting an aim and setting a target. We believe in net zero, we believe in decarbonisation, but we don't think that you can just stop at that point. We've got to set the target more ambitiously and actually thinking about how we can deliver the long-term solutions for the organisation. And those of you that know what Hitachi Rail are doing with the trains as a service, with First Great Western and LNER, know that we're comfortable with very long-term contracts, and we're looking as far forward as we possibly can to recognise that government regulations are not going to stop even at net zero. We've got to try and actually strip carbon and emissions out of the entire supply chain in the longer term. And so within the social innovation business, as was, and the zero carbon business going forward, we've got the values of how we can deliver economic, social and environmental value through delivering new technologies, new solutions to communities. And we're combining a number of different initiatives, and we're incubating within the zero carbon business and then accelerating solutions into the marketplace. So around low carbon transport, but also into mass and intelligent transport infrastructure, and actually thinking about our cities of the future and how we can build that forward, and thinking holistically around these things. So not just thinking about individual silos, individual activities. It's about how we can bring it all together and how we can take all of the skills and capabilities across Hitachi and create new organic growth organisations. And that's really what the zero carbon business is all about. So within that sort of net zero carbon target, we're working with SSE Rail and we're actually up in Glasgow for other reasons this week, because one, COP, but two, we're also fitting out and deploying first bus solution at Caledonia Caledonia Depot. 148 buses that are going to be electrified. We're also setting up second and third party charging with some sticky tape and string, ready for COP26, and just making sure that we can actually show the world and showcase first bus, Hitachi, Octopus are also playing a role in that, and SSE, in terms of what can be done and thinking about the different elements of what we can deliver and showing how we can deliver that across the organisation. But the key thing and the key point for this presentation is really that we're not just thinking about electrifying fleet. We're thinking about, well, hang on a minute, there's a whole bunch of fixed assets that can actually be decarbonised. And Wendi, this is exactly what you're talking about in terms of what can we do as Hitachi to stimulate that, and looking at finance models, so funding the capital, looking at SPV models. How can we accelerate that growth and actually investing in the sustainable infrastructure into those PV sites? Working we've got a partnership with GridServe, who most of you are probably aware of. They're also a big solar farm organisation. How can we do exactly what Wendi was describing in terms of putting in strategically near or on-site PV to actually deliver sun to wheel and start moving us closer to that zero carbon goal? So when we're talking about depots and fleet, ultimately there are a number of different objectives: how we can reduce the total cost of ownership, how we can deliver social good, and we are positioning First Bus as an example of how we can deliver ESG outcomes to the local communities. The role of the future bus depot, the role of the future train depot as a hub for the community through electrification is fundamental, and we believe passionately in how we can start actually regenerating our towns and city centres and drawing people in for different reasons. But the access to the electricity, recognising that bus depots only use 30% of the energy when they're electrifying their fleet, because they're out and about for 70% of their time, 30% in the evenings. What can we do with that energy during the rest of the day? And that's cargo bikes, last mile delivery, emergency services, and general public, if possible, subject to health and safety regulations. But also then thinking about how we can make fleets more efficient and getting them working more effectively by looking at as a service, pure as a service models. And I touched on the rail side. We're pioneers in as a service delivery through trains, through the IEP programme with First Great Western. We felt some pain recently in terms of experiencing that, but that's what it's about. It's about having an SLA that actually delivers against specific targets. And if those trains are not on the tracks, we don't get paid, and we pay penalties, and rightly so. That's the whole concept of as a service, and we're introducing that into bus and thinking about that as well. How can we deliver depots as a service? Can we be as ambitious as that? Can we fully fund, finance, and deliver the outcomes that we need from a zero carbon perspective? And ultimately providing a platform for growth for those businesses as a result, because they're going to be much more efficient, much more effective in utilising electricity in a more effective and efficient manner. So really we have a vision for the depot of the future, and that could be a bus depot, it could be very much a train depot. And this is a graphic representation of the Caledonia depot and what could be done with it. How can we leverage that site to think about retail opportunities, second and third party charging? How can we use the roof space? How can we use the land that's available to utilise with solar? And stick in a whole bunch of battery storage to make sure that we can, first of all, zero out the energy consumption from the grid, but then also look at how we can start either utilising that energy for second and third party charging purposes, or sell it back to the grid and create new revenue streams. And we've gone into a profit share model with First Bus. So we're going to be investing in the capital. We will get to break even, and then from that point onwards, we then go profit share, essentially a rent to First Bus for using the facilities. But it's a pretty healthy rent that we're paying for that, because there's a lot of revenue opportunity. And that's the picture in the corner there is the Braintree GridServe site, which is where we're leveraging a lot of the knowledge from that site to think about, well, how can we really make the economics work at a depot level. So zoning in then, we've actually done some work with Network Rail, looking at a number of sites to think about, well, how can we approach some of that 4% that you spoke about, Wendi, in terms of how we, and you're obviously already thinking about that, and I think we're working together in terms of thinking exactly the same things. How can we leverage those depots? How can we think about it from a mobility and from a zero carbon perspective? And actually look at it in pure economic terms and think about a payback on it. Why not? We can mix capitalism with actually saving the planet, and that's what we're trying to do, because that's what's going to stimulate the right kind of answers. So we're looking at all of the low carbon technology investments there, and can see that there are very specific returns. And the way that we're doing this is very much in an ecosystem based approach. So there's Hitachi name there on quite a few things, but as I've already mentioned, we're working with Octopus on the energy trading. We're working with a number of partners globally on some of the software and the optimization. We're obviously leveraging what we're doing on Optimize Prime from a charging perspective, but also looking at working with telemetry organizations to get the right kind of data in the right kind of place, and then working with Hitachi Energy from a hardware perspective, and our friends in Hitachi Capital Vehicle Solutions for the finance, but also broader in terms of people like Rock Rail, who supported the IEP program for the rail program to deliver the finance and to build out SPV models to give us the leverage to scale and provide the finance over a longer term period. So very much a partnership approach is how we're looking at this. In terms of then going into sort of the type of work we've done at detail on a Network Rail depot, you can see the max and min. So you can put in a minimum commitment to deliver just a few elements, quite a decent payback period, but actually not necessarily the right kind of CO2 savings or the revenue opportunities. But what we want to do is, and what we're doing through First Bus and through other partnerships, is testing and trialling out these. We've done a lot of modelling to see how these things are working, and now we're actually into it's effectively where the rubber hits the road, and seeing how these solutions actually deliver in the long term and provide us with the right kind of outcomes for the organisations we're working with, for the finance partners, and ultimately for the community in terms of taking the CO2 out of the air. So if you then scale that up, and again, this touches again on a lot of what Wendi was saying, but what we're looking at is how we can actually make this work. We're looking at how we can fund a lot of this if that's required, and how we can look at the right kind of economic models to build this out and to deliver the depots of the future, and make sure that we can build out the partnerships. And we're very much looking at an open book approach to this. We're market making here, and we're proud of our ability to market make. But what's absolutely critical to this is recognising that there's a little bit of give and take. We've got to, if you want us to invest, we've got to make sure that we're understanding what the opportunities are, how they actually come into fruition in reality, and then how we can then build more sustainable models as we go forward and provide the finance houses with the right kind of returns in the longer term and against long-term deals. So that's covered everything I wanted to cover today. I think you've probably got a couple of minutes back on that, so I hope that was useful. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. Just at time again, I'll just have to take one question, if that's okay. I think we've got one here. I'll just take this one question and then we'll get other images. And we might go around and I'll finish around for a
sure thing. Yeah.
So
yeah.
There's any questions, please do.
Like I said, if this is a difficult question, over to you, Tom.
Hi, Richard Kemp Harper from Lara Energy. I think a lot of us are interested in the practicalities of that sort of depot setup for charging. You're talking 148 buses for first bus, and that's pragmatic calculation says that's sort of 50 megawatt hours and about 10 megawatts of power delivery. What's the reality and practicalities of delivering that to that sort of site?
It's a really good question, because I was talking with we were talking about issues that have happened in Stuttgart just in the last couple of days with bus batteries blowing up. You know, there are a number of different aspects, and one of the key elements of our proposition is that software layer to make it less complicated. Because one of the things we recognise is that ultimately, if you zone it down to the KPI, is the battery charged to what you need it to be, and something goes wrong, that could be down to a multitude of different issues. It could be down to grid connection, the transformers, the charging hardware, the charging software, the kit on the bus, human error, and failure to plug things in, and also the telemetry on the bus and the telemetry on the battery. So what it is complicated, and it's a systematized solution. It's, you know, traditionally bus industry has always bought buses from a catalogue, because essentially all the infrastructure is just there. It's given. We've got fuel. We've got access to carbon-based fuels. So yeah, you're right. It is very complex. But what we're doing is putting ourselves really as the prime, and helping manage that complexity, and we enable that complexity through the software. So our common data platform is how we plug in all of those different variables, so we can manage a 98% charging max on the warranty on the battery, and we can also make sure that either the chargers don't charge without any restrictions on them, which could obviously put too much pressure onto the transformers and onto the network, but also onto the buses. So the answer is yeah. I think those figures are about right in terms of the amount of energy that's going in there. And at the moment, piecemeal approaches and siloed buying is actually creating a really big challenge, because you've got different pieces of kit that don't talk to each other. We said pilots are great because everybody's learned from the industry, but actually now we've got to look at a scale model that is leverageable to provide interoperability. That's my timer. To leverage interoperability, but also to manage that complexity and make sure you've got a single pane of glass that tells you something has gone wrong somewhere, and remediate that issue as quickly and as effectively as possible to avoid catastrophic failures.
Thank you very much, Mike. If I just get everyone to give Mike a round of applause. Scott Parnell, he's got grab up 2 other bit of pictures, and Gary, you choose yours, and then we've got and then the second one from Dr. Will Midgley from Loughborough University. If you can make sure you're ready as well, thank you.
Because usually they produce in the 30s. No, but I have to change the model.
Hi, good afternoon everybody, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to you about one of our products today. One of our products is FlexMSC. My name is Gary Sanford. I'm the rail manager for Scott Parnell in Scotland, and Scott Parnell are market leaders in the rail industry in regards to innovative, sustainability and environmentally friendly products to the rail industry. Now, one of the products, as I mentioned, is FlexMSC. FlexMSC is a vegetated retaining wall system. It is used naturally to build geomodular, resilient structures throughout kind of many sectors. In regards to the actual product itself, excuse me, it is naturally horizontal, typical 45 to 85 degree angle. It's able to withstand unlimited differential sentiment. It has a 120-year design life, ASTM, a 75-year warranty. It's also 50% recyclable material, but more importantly, it's 100% recyclable. So it's actually a permanent product and a permanent installation. However, with it being 100% recyclable, it can also be used as a temporary installation, which has been very popular with our customers at the moment. It's BREEAM compatible, so it's around about 21 points, I believe, but it also installs 2/3 of the time of an actual traditional product to do with, obviously, retaining walls. One of the key things with the FlexMSC itself is it's built like an actual brick wall. So you've got a bag, you've got a plate, and then you've got a bag. The bag is a geotextile bag. The geotextile bag is made up of two components. There's a geotextile bag, and the interlocking plate. The geotextile bag is also needle punched. So with it being needle punched, it means it can actually drain water all the way. So if when you've obviously got it installed, etc., the actual water can act as a free draining system. The second thing is it also allows the roots to grow all the way through the bag. So instead of moving the bags out of the way, they can actually be installed. The roots will grow through into the back of obviously the system and creating an actual knit for that actual system. Sorry. It's also manufactured process alone emits 97% less greenhouse gases than concrete, but also 98.5% less than steel. So actually compared to a traditional system, and before it's left the actual factory floor, it's already carbon neutral. It goes that little bit further, and excuse me, it goes that little bit further, and at the same time, it goes that little bit further and becomes carbon negative within as little as 12 months. So once it's actually been installed and it's already been vegetated, the chance of it to be mature is absorbing more carbon than it would have emitted in its entire life up to that point. FlexMSC also is widely used across all different sectors, but usually with ourselves in the rail sector, it is used mostly for retaining walls, culverts, and excuse me, culverts, retaining walls. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Just a very second now, Dr. Wilkerson to talk about the now.
That was my first time actually doing that, so just
well done.
apologies, obviously.
Well done. Thank you, Will.
Thanks.
Good morning. To you now.
Well, good afternoon, I guess, at this point. So I'm just here a bit to talk about some of the modelling that we're doing at Loughborough University, and also to talk a bit about engagement with universities more widely, I guess. So we've got the Hitachi branding, lovely. I'm part of a group called the Control Systems Group. We've got a group of academics who do modelling and control-based stuff, and we've worked with various different sectors, including aerospace and automotive. And at the moment, we're also working with Network Rail on some low friction train software and control techniques. So we've got a long history of working with people in the rail sector as well as other sectors. So we've got this kind of cross transfer of technologies. In terms of the specific expertise that I wanted to talk about today, we've developed a very detailed rail vehicle model for use in determining the energy usage of a train. And we've used that to determine what the electricity and the diesel demand are for a train over a given route. So the one we've used at the moment is from London Paddington out to Plymouth, but we could use that conceivably on any route, and we can give you detailed breakdowns of the emissions and also the energy usage of that train on that route. We then did what I guess my job is in applying control, and we applied some control to that to try and minimise the amount of diesel that train was using. It was based on a Class 800, Hitachi Class 800, so I guess the branding is probably correct for that. And we by adding this controller, we reduced the amount of diesel that was used and also the CO2 that was emitted by 19% on this route from Newbury to Plymouth, because obviously it's electrified from Paddington up to Newbury. And we also allowed, this model allows us to also determine how much we can decarbonise using electricity. So what electrification means for decarbonising and comparing that to the base case of not electrifying. It means we can also investigate where we should electrify and how much we should probably spend on that electrification. So it's quite a handy model for us to play around with. I'm going to bring up my thanks slide. There's a couple of QR codes there that link to the papers that talk about this content that I've talked about. So the one is on the left-hand side there is intermittent electrification. I know it's unpopular with some people in the rail industry, but we're trying to make the carbon case for that as being an interim kind of step on the way to full electrification. On the right-hand side is the academic paper of the model that we developed. So that's the content that we are developing as a university and as a control group. But I guess more widely, I wanted to just talk also about, we are part of a group called UCRIN, the UK Rail Research and Innovation Network. I'm reasonably sure I got that right.
Yes.
And so I'm just basically here to also say that UCRIN is has been a great thing for us as a university in terms of working with other companies or with other universities on some of the challenges that are faced by the rail sector. So I'd highly recommend that you work either with RIA to contact us or also come through UCRIN in terms of coming to talk to universities about some of your problems. And I guess I also have to make a plug for the battery rail session. I'm chairing the battery rail session later on in the day. So if you want to ask me some more questions or talk about the use of battery in rail, which we've also done some research on, I'll present some of the research we've done in that area, and I will also be chairing a session on some discussions about how batteries can help us decarbonise the rail sector. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, sorry, I don't know what's happened with the slide template there. I do apologise. We'll sort that out. Just before, Sam's going to come back down now to talk about how this afternoon's sessions are going to work. This is, for those of you online, this is particularly important, so if you could all put just 5 minutes to pay attention. But can I just thank all the speakers again one more time and the representatives. And Sam,
Thanks, Carl. I think those slides and the Hitachi branding might have been my IT mistake. I apologise. I did used to work for Loughborough University, but I promise it wasn't any beef I had in particular about the way in which I was mistreated as an employee. I'm joking, I don't want to pretend. Yes, so I just wanted to give a quick brief. I'm the only thing that stands in the way of your lunch, so I'll be very quick. After lunch, we will be breaking into 3 separate parallel sessions. The sessions are panel sessions, so there's 3 or 4 speakers in each session who are technology and experts in that area. The sessions are hydrogen technology. That will be chaired by John Constable, who presented earlier, and that will occur in this room. If you're joining us online, Milda will be placing links in the chat just now to these 3 sessions, so you'll be able to click on the session you want to join remotely, and we are recording all 3, so you'll be able to play the other ones back later, but obviously you won't be able to ask any questions on those. So hydrogen is in here with John. If you want to know about batteries with Will from Loughborough University chairing, that will be in rooms 4 and 5. And if you'd like to know about low cost and efficient electrification, that will be in rooms 6 and 7, and Richard Fluin from Arcadis, our other sponsor, will be chairing that session. Okay, I hope that's nice and simple. Enjoy your lunch. We will reconvene at 1:40 p.m. in your chosen room. Thank you.